So welcome everyone to the side event Thriving Youth from Ageism to Intergenerational Dialogue, which is organized by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the World Health Organization, and the International Labour Organization, and the major group of children and youth. Good morning to anyone who is joining us from New York, and good evening and good afternoon for anyone who's joining us from the different parts of the world. My name is Batul Al-Wahdani. I'm proudly a youth advocate from Jordan. I'm the past president of the International Federation of Medical Students Association, and currently a junior doctor working in Scotland. It's my privilege and honor to be moderating this side event, which has lots of hope in it and lots of potential for great solutions to combat ageism. So you might be wondering about two questions when you registered for the side event and you decided to join this discussion today. The first one is, why are we discussing ageism today, and how is it related to young people? Today we want to convince you that ageism is a problem and an issue that affects all the different age groups and crosses age, unfortunately, and it's not just an older generation issue. And we want to go a little bit further and give a focus to younger populations and their experiences of ageism, to be able to create this partnership that crosses age and groups to combat ageism. And the second question that you might be wondering about is, what's the aim of this side event and what will be happening in it? And as we know that this side event is on the margins of the 60th Commission for Social Development, which aims to focus on inclusive and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Through this side event, we will aim to raise awareness on ageism, but also in order to address the inclusive and resilient recovery, we need to come up with solutions that address ageism and address it on the different all age groups to ensure that there is no longer a disempowerment of both the young and the old. I'm going to draw you a little bit of a picture of what is going to be happening over the next 70 minutes or so. So at the beginning of the side event, we'll give the floor to the younger generation, to inspiring young advocates and leaders from different backgrounds who are going to draw us a picture of how ageism actually affects young people and their opportunities in different aspects. And after that, we're going to dive deeper into ageism itself as a problem and its determinants and its nature, and what we can do and what are the levels that we can go to so we can address it. And afterwards comes my favorite part of this side event, which is an intergenerational dialogue between leaders from different generations who are going to share with us solutions based on their experience on how we can address ageism as a social attitude and as an issue. Towards the end of the side event, we'll have the chance to address several questions or comments from the audience itself. So I encourage you to use the chat option throughout this webinar. Please feel free to leave your comments or any questions you have to any of the speakers, and hopefully, if the time allows, we'll go over those comments and questions towards the end of the side event. And if you are having any particular question towards a certain speaker, please make sure to address it accordingly on the chat. So we're going to start our side event now, and I'm very happy to welcome our first speaker, which is one of two young speakers we will be having in the first section of the side event, who are youth advocates, peace builders, and youth leaders who are going to share with us lived experiences on ageism and how it affects young people. So first, I'll give the floor to Sarah. Sarah, please introduce yourself and tell us from your experience as a young peace builder, how you have seen that ageism affects your work and aspirations.
Thank you so much, Butul, and greetings to everyone, young people, adults, and senior leaders. Today, I represent myself as a young peace builder with one central mission, making world peace possible one day. My name is Sarah Messaoudi, and I currently work full-time on this mission, being strategic and communication officer with Justice Call, as well as regional officer with GPAC, Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict. I have been engaged in the field of peace building now since 5 years ago. And since day one, I have put into this aspiration all efforts, strength, determination, and hope. While at some moments, these efforts have been recognized, at many other moments, it has been very challenging to make it through. These moments is where I wasn't really perceived based on my talent, motivation, or qualification, but rather just judged because of my age or little experience. In fact, after having some community work experience since 5 years ago, I wanted to join the peace building field as a professional job. And it is then where I discovered, let's say, the international organization world and the different aspects of it. And then when I found out that most of opportunities open for young people are usually either internship or entry-level job. It was very seldom to find opportunities of, let's say, director, manager, or other leadership position that young people could be eligible to apply for. Not also to mention the high barrier of entry because competition was very fierce, and also because of COVID, there was a huge reduction of these entry-level jobs. Now, all these challenges and the difficulty to find, let's say, at a young age, a job in the peace building field, I had actually to make the decision to shift all my career path into entrepreneurship while working as volunteer in international organization in the peace building field. And also because of my young age, all of these volunteer opportunities were evolving around executive tasks, like, let's say, translation, writing, taking notes, writing social media posts. I was never part of strategizing, planning, or let's say, design of programs, which are the things I love to do the most. The highest engagement maybe that I have received or reached is to be consulted, but not truly to be a partner or a contributor in the decision making. Now, this situation remained for 3 years. 3 years until I finally got my opportunity to work on the peace building professionally and strategically, and actually further nurture my aspiration. So it took years of motivation, of not giving up, of staying with the same determination, and years of connecting finally to the right people who actually believed in me despite my age. And it is back then, at that moment specifically, that I discovered we are more than our age, we are more than just a CV, and we are definitely much more than plenty of rejection that we received because of our age. Now, as a peace builder, this journey of challenge and resilience will further continue, will forever continue, even if you are in the right setting. It will continue when you are advocating in front of decision makers. It will continue as well when you are part of negotiation or mediation process. It will continue when you become a manager on your own and having a team, and you will be perceived too young to manage a team. So yeah, as a young person, you have to make extra effort. You have to be present here and there. You need to try different things and to always face the world with a determination and smile. To conclude, for me, everything, it was all worth it, because you might think that I lost some years to finally be part of something I was looking for, but not at all, because honestly, I learned so much from these years that I currently use in my current work. And aging is a process that I embrace it and I learned from it. And something I'm sure of every day is that I'm growing into the person I want to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for these very, very inspiring words. In fact, if you would allow me to quote you, these are very inspiring words, which is, we are more than our age, more than just a CV, and more than a rejection. And it's amazing to see young people as you doing this change and leading it. But although it's a glimpse of your experience as an individual I'm very sure that millions of young people go through the same thing and face multiple age-related barriers when it comes to their participation in decision-making and their career progress. So this is just a first-hand lived experience of how ageism actually affects young people when it comes to their participation in decision-making, in employment, and career growth. So now we'll move to our second young speaker, Rafu, who is also another youth advocate and leader and peace builder. And Rafu, I'll give you the floor to tell us also about your experience and how you think that ageism affects young people meaningful participation in political processes.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Rafiu Lawal. I work with Building Blocks for Peace Foundation, and Building Blocks for Peace Foundation is a youth-led non-governmental organization that is working on conflict prevention, peace building, accountability governance, and sustainable development here in Nigeria. Security through innovative approaches like community sensitization, sports, advocacy, research, etc. And I think that this whole conversation around ageism is something that is very, very critical, and I'm passionate about it because it has manifested, greatly in my own life, even as a young peace builder in Nigeria. Let me start by saying that young people in Nigeria are excluded from sensitive decision-making institutions and positions, especially as a result of their age. There is this age-long adage that says that what an old man will see while sitting down, a young person would not see even when standing up. You know, this literally means that the older persons, because of their long years of existence, of living, have more understanding, more wisdom to contribute to decision-making processes and peace-building processes better than young people. So to a very large extent, when you talk about decision-making institutions and peace-building processes, young people are being excluded and this is deny the huge potentials and resources that young people can bring to bear, especially in terms of decision making and peace processes. Then again, I would like to share very fast recently, and it was a context for an elected position, for one of the next that Building Blocks for Peace Foundation is also affiliated to.
Rafu, sorry to interrupt you. It's just the connection is a bit cutting. Maybe if you close the camera, we can hear you better, or because
Hello?
we can't hear you clearly. Do you hear us, Rafu?
Can you? Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me too?
Yeah, it was just because it was cutting. So if you can maybe speak louder, or if it continues to cut, maybe you can close the camera. It might make the connection better.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I was just saying that young people in Nigeria have been excluded from decision-making institutions and peace-building processes. The society still believes largely in an adage that says that what an old person will see while sitting down, young ones will not see even when standing up. And this literally means that the older ones, because of their long years of living and existence, they have more wisdom, more understanding to contribute to decision-making issues and peace-building processes better than young people. And this, to a very large extent, denies, the potentials and huge resources that young people bring to bear when you talk about decision-making and peace-building processes. And I was trying to cite an example of an experience that I recently had during a context for a position that would have allowed me the opportunity to coordinate a network of civil society organizations here in Nigeria. And when it was time for elections and all of that, the manifestos went and all of that. But eventually, I lost that election. And the reason why I lost that election was not because of my inability, was not because of my lack of capacity, was not because of my lack of experience, but it was basically because how on earth would a young person like this lead a network of over 100 people, including older people? So to a very large extent, I feel that ageism manifests in our work and it's denying us the opportunity to contribute our resources. It's denying us the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to political and peace building processes here in Nigeria.
Batul, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Rafu, for your intervention. And it's very sad to hear about a lot of the obstacles that young people face in their local communities when it comes to their ability to participate in political processes. And unfortunately, sometimes in different systems, they even go beyond and make the age as a determinant for participation itself. Which hinders a lot of the abilities of young people and the change that they can bring in their societies. But we also see all around the world that young people have led revolutions and changes, and hearing about your own experience with the elections and everything is just a glimpse of the change that young people try to do in their communities and continue to do to improve their ability and equal chance to participate in political processes. This was just a glimpse of the experiences that young people face when it comes to ageism. And this was just to convince you as our attendees that ageism is not just an issue that affects the older generation, but in fact, it's an issue that crosses the different age groups and affect both the young and the old. And now, as we had the first glimpse of what ageism looks like when experienced by young people, we're going to dive deeper into ageism itself to understand it, to understand its nature and determinants with Dr. Vania de la Fuente, who is a technical officer in the Demographic Change and Healthy Aging Unit at the World Health Organization. We're very lucky to have Dr. Vania with us here today, as she is one of the two lead authors of the first UN global report on ageism. So Dr. Vania, the floor is yours. If you can guide us and build for us the next process of this side event, in which we will focus on the solution. But first, we need to understand better what ageism is, its nature and determinants.
Thank you so much, Batul, and happy Monday, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here today and to share this space with such inspiring speakers. So I wanted to say that before we move on to maybe diving a bit deeper into what ageism is and how it affects us. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and I hope that that is seen by all of the people joining us today. So if Batul, if you could give me a sign that you can see this screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. All right. So in the next few minutes, what I was hoping to do here is to first talk to you a little bit, only a little bit, about the global campaign to combat ageism and where it comes from, and then dive deeper into the key findings of the global report on ageism that we launched last year. And then again, this event is an opportunity to not only learn about ageism, but also to be you know, just excited about the many things that we can actually do to address ageism. So it's an opportunity to raise awareness about the issue, understand how it affects every single one of us, but also understand what we can actually do to address it. So in terms of where the global campaign to combat ageism comes from, this comes from the year 2016, I would say, is the first year where we started to take action. And this was because the 194 member states of the World Health Organization actually called on the Director General to develop, in cooperation with other partners, this global campaign to combat ageism. I think at this point in time, countries really started to understand that it was going to be very difficult to develop adequate policies or programs, in this case, specifically for older populations, unless ageism was addressed. So this was I guess the starting point for the global campaign to combat ageism. But countries again reaffirmed their commitment to address ageism now that they adopted the Decade of Healthy Aging. And this happened at the end of 2020. And the Decade of Healthy Aging will span between 2021 and 2030. But the global campaign to combat ageism does not only look at ageism as it affects older populations. We already heard by the two examples provided by Sarah and Rafiu that ageism actually affects every single one of us. It affects us throughout our life course. So the vision of this campaign is to really create a world for all ages. And this is part of the main work that I do at WHO, is to try to move towards this world. And we're trying to get there by changing the way we all think, feel, and act towards age and aging. And you will see now when I present the definition of ageism, why this mission makes sense and why we should all be working towards changing that way we think, feel, and act. So if we start the presentation with the definition, as you see here on this slide, ageism refers to how we think, how we feel, and how we act towards others or towards ourselves based on age. So you may get a sense now why the mission of the campaign makes sense. And it's important to focus on these three dimensions and not just one of them, which sometimes happens in some languages. They translate ageism, for example, as only being composed of discrimination. And that's problematic because we know that two other dimensions actually affect us, which are the stereotypes and the prejudice. So again, this slide is very important in terms of us understanding why ageism is. But for the rest of the presentation, I actually wanted to talk about why we should all be worrying about ageism. And there are three main reasons why we should all be concerned. The first one is that it affects us all. The second one is that it is everywhere. And the last one is that it is harmful. I will talk about each of them in the coming slides. So if we start with the first reason, the fact that it affects us all. As you've learned earlier today, based on the examples that have been provided, ageism can affect us through our lifetime, from younger into older age. We know that we're not born ageist, but it actually starts very early on in life. Children as young as 4 are already aware of the age-based stereotypes that are common in their culture. And from that age onwards, what we do is that we internalize those stereotypes after being repeatedly exposed to the stereotypes. And we start using them to guide how we act or how we feel towards other people or towards ourselves. We should also worry about ageism because it's everywhere. It exists in our institutions, in our relationships, and in ourselves. Again, you already heard some examples, but I would like to think every single person joining us today where you actually see ageism around you. And I'm going to give examples as to where it manifests in terms of these 3 levels so that you can already think about examples that you may be more familiar with. So if we look at institutions or institutional ageism, this is the type of ageism that we see, for example, in laws or in social norms or in rules and the practices of specific institutions that may systematically disadvantage us on the basis of our age. And we see examples of institutional ageism across a very large number of institutions. It can be, for example, in politics, as we heard, it can be in employment, as we heard, but it can also be in healthcare, it can be in the media, it can be in the legal system, and many more. We also see ageism in our relationships with one another. And this can manifest, for example, when someone patronizes us or does not allow us to make decisions for ourselves only because of our age. It can also manifest, for example, when we ignore someone. We ignore their views or we use a specific way of talking to them just because we assume certain things about that person because of their age. And last but not least, we see self-directed ageism, which is the ageism that we turn against ourselves. As I was mentioning, we can internalize the stereotypes that we have been repeatedly exposed to and use them against ourselves. So we apply those stereotypes to ourselves. For example, younger people may internalize a stereotype that is quite common that we see, And that is that younger people have very little to contribute because they have less experience because of the years that they have lived than people of older age groups. And if we internalize that stereotype in younger age, this may limit, for example, our contribution to decision-making tables or in the workplace. We may actually prevent ourselves from contributing because we have internalized that stereotype. Other stereotypes that are quite common in younger age include, for example, assuming that all younger people are tech savvy, they're lazy, for example, or troublesome. So again, the stereotypes that we may see applying to younger or older people will be different, but because they are overgeneralizations, they are all actually inaccurate and potentially very negative. In terms of numbers, globally, we know that 1 in 2 people are ageist against older people. And whilst we don't have global prevalence data on ageism as it affects younger people, we do have data from Europe, and this is the one region where we have prevalence data on ageism against all age groups. And in this region, younger people report more ageism than other age groups. If we dive a bit deeper into ageism against younger people, we also see that people who've had little contact with other age groups are more likely to be ageist against younger people. And being female and having poor health means you're more likely to be a target of ageism against younger people. If we look at ageism against older people, the report tells us that you're more likely to experience this ageism the older you are, but also if you're care dependent and if you're working in sectors like high tech. And people are more likely to be ageist against older people if they are younger, if they're male, if they have received less education, or if they fear dying or have had little contact with older people. So one of the things that you see here in terms of those factors or determinants that increase the likelihood of someone being ageist, we see one that is common in terms of ageism against younger people and against older people, which is the amount of contact that we've had with other age groups. And this will be important for later on in the presentation. The last and very important reason that I wanted to talk to you today about today, why we should all be worried about ageism, is that it harms us individually and collectively, affecting both our health and well-being when we're older, and costing our societies billions of dollars. Ageism is associated with an earlier death, and as well as poor and physical and mental health when we are older. This includes the presence of chronic conditions, hospitalizations, and depression. We also know that ageism increases, for example, the likelihood of us engaging in risky health behaviors like smoking or drinking alcohol excessively. And it affects our quality of life and takes a heavy economic toll on both individuals and society. The effects that I'm talking about here are seen in all parts of the world and are most likely to impact disadvantaged groups. And another thing that it's worth to consider is that whilst ageism has these effects on its own, it also intersects and exacerbates other forms of disadvantage, including those based on sex, race, and disability, making the effects potentially even worse. Unfortunately, most of the evidence that we have on the impacts of ageism have looked at the impacts of ageism in older adults. We still know very little about the specific impacts of ageism against younger people. And this is certainly an area of research that we hope to see evolve in the coming years, so we have a better understanding of the specific impacts of ageism when we're younger, but also the cumulative impact of ageism throughout our lives. I hope that the information that I have presented so far has convinced everyone today that we have to address ageism, that we must do it to create a more equal world. But I also wanted to say that we should not only worry about ageism, we should also do something to address it. And the great news that I wanted to share today is that for the first time, we know what works in reducing or eliminating ageism. As we show in the reports, it all boils down to 3 key strategies: policy and law, educational activities, and intergenerational interventions. Policy and law can address discrimination and inequality on the basis of age, and it can help to protect our human rights. This strategy works in reducing ageism against every age group, and that's very important. It's also important to consider that when we talk about policy and law, we're talking about both national laws as well as international law, which can include international conventions or treaties. This also includes the mechanisms that we need to actually implement and monitor policies and laws, including, for example, human rights agencies or courts. It's not enough to just have a written policy. We need to make sure that that's actually implemented. The second strategy that we know works is educational activities, which can help us to enhance empathy and also dispel misconceptions that we may have about different age groups or older people. It can help to reduce prejudice as well by providing this accurate information about aging, for example, and those different age groups. They can be included in all levels of education, as well as in both formal and non-formal educational settings. And examples of educational activities can include things like courses or workshops that transmit information, but also activities that involve role-playing or virtual reality even. And the last strategy that works in addressing ageism are intergenerational interventions, which basically bring younger and older people to work together on something that they are passionate about. These types of interventions, because of their very nature, can be as diverse as our interests may be. So they can involve story sharing, they can involve singing, or living together in an apartment, they can involve painting. And they're one of the most effective interventions to reduce ageism against older people. And they've shown a lot of promise in reducing ageism against younger people. Remember that I mentioned that one of the determinants that increase the likelihood of someone being ageist against both older and younger people was if they had had little contact with other age groups. So of course, intergenerational interventions offer us those opportunity to foster interactions between people of different age groups. And I'm actually really looking forward as well to the intergenerational dialogue that will follow later in today's event, which is a way to bring different generations together on something that affects us. But beyond these strategies, we also recognize that we need a lot more research, and I flagged a few areas to understand ageism, and that we also need to change the existing narrative around age and aging. This narrative is all around us, and once you start becoming aware of what ageism is, you will start seeing it literally everywhere around you. It's in the news, it's in literature, in all the books that you've read when you were younger that you're reading now. It's in conversations, it's in humor. It's literally everywhere. So we all need to challenge ageism when we see it, including the stereotypes and the misconceptions and prejudice that we ourselves may hold, because we've all grown up in ageist societies, unfortunately. So to change this negative narrative, we need to, again, raise awareness and build capacity. And to support that process, we have created a rich toolkit that provides different types of resources that are available to you, which include things like short bits of information about what ageism is, but also, for example, a guide that can help you spark conversations about ageism with different people. It includes an event guide to help you develop your own events on ageism, and a lot more. So I encourage you to take a look. I will be providing links to some of these resources on the chat as well, so you have easy access. And just before I close, I wanted to say that any global movement is, of course, the result of the many great actions that take place at all levels, at local level, at national level, and at regional level. So we want to give visibility to all of this important work so that we can all learn and grow collectively. So to do this sharing of resources and knowledge from different parts of the world, we have created a platform for the Decade of Healthy Aging where you can submit not only information about who you are if you're already working on this space, but also to share, as I was mentioning, all of the tools that you may already have pulled together so that others can also learn from what you're doing. Resources can be shared in English, Spanish, and French. And again, I will also be providing a link to this platform so that you know about it. So just to summarize, ageism really affects every single one of us. It is everywhere and it is very harmful, but it can be combated. So I really hope that every single person joining us here today joins the movement to help create this world for all ages. I will be more than happy to answer any questions that may have come up, and that will be, I think, written on the chat, as Batul said, and look forward to the rest of the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vania. This was very insightful, and I personally believe that everyone from the attendees should have should be convinced already that ageism is a problem that affects everyone, and that we can do so many things to address this issue. And most importantly, the very clear message that you gave us that we know what works, and those 3 different types of solutions will actually give us a framework and will guide our next discussion in the upcoming segment. So thank you very much. But let's now go back to our first 2 youth advocates and speakers who gave us firsthand and a lived experience of ageism. And I just want to hear from you again, Sarah and Rafu, after you've heard this presentation, which gave facts about ageism and how those facts actually translate in your experiences, so we can go further and convince everyone that ageism affects the younger generation as well as the old. And I'll start with you, Sarah, and just going back to what you've mentioned earlier, I can actually relate to a lot of what you've mentioned coming from the world of student and youth organizations. I used to hate whenever we hear those promises and ringing messages that youth are change makers and they are the future, but actually they are usually used to tokenize young people, to abuse their free services, and to make sure that the focus of their participation is voluntary rather than treating them as equal partners. So based on your experience, can you tell us more, how do you see that ageism can intersect with other types of biases towards young people, and how it can impact the opportunities that young people have in their communities, in employment, in leadership, and equal participation?
Thank you so much, Butul, and also thank you to Dr. Vania for presenting the findings. I would say that for me, ageism for young people can be demonstrated honestly on so many levels and on different situations, especially that today's youth are perceived very empathetic, socially responsible, and very active, yet they are challenged with stereotype of being less competent, or maybe that they are not ready to take big responsibility yet. And this actually starts, let's talk about jobs and employment. It starts from the first step in job search. So you have to settle actually for less and accept work conditions that you might not be so comfortable with, like doing only executive tasks, or being overwhelmed and overworked because you are too young, or taking credits, someone else take your credits and not having your work recognized, or also not being taken seriously. Even if you succeed in getting a managerial position, it would be very challenging for your colleagues to see you truly as an effective, let's say, manager or leader. So this actually all undermines young people belonging to the organization they work with. It shatters their confidence and their creativity to be initiator, as well as to pursue leadership position. So moreover, because of all of these challenges, ageism manifests itself for young people in having a constant pressure to achieve more in less time. So we need to prove ourselves. We feel obliged to finish that master's degree or that PhD before even finishing before 30, to have 2 to 3 jobs in our 20s, there are even programs that put the criteria of age limit of 25 or 30, and they put high qualification for such age limit. It's like we have a to-do list that we need to accomplish before 30 years old, or else we fail. Hence, as young people, we have to do many things. We need to volunteer, we need to do so much work, we need to give up our weekends, our time with our family to go networking or to do an extra project. We need to give up this time and energy and effort, so we develop successful path and we accomplish everything early. We feel pressured to be unique, extraordinary, and achievers, and to stand out. And this only leads to burnout, stress, and anxiety and frustration. And despite that, we are giving all this energy, motivation, and willingness, even if we want to participate in political life, we are challenged, even though we want to impact on the sustainable way and on the long-term level. Because if we step in courageously to meaningfully engage on the policy level, we are often excluded, not listened to, or we are given limited opportunities to engage. Because yes, sometimes we are criticized of our lack of knowledge and lack of experience, but even in the decisions that directly affect us, we are generally not there. We are generally not contributing. Not to forget, of course, the argument of you are too ambitious and it's better that you grow up to understand, or you will, once you grow up, you will understand. While there should be actually a true appreciation and recognition of this ambition and drive and hunger that young people have, and instead of channeling it into truly making an impact, to create, to serve, to actually make a difference. After all, human beings, because they are too ambitious, today we can fly over the plains, we can go to space, we landed on the moon, and each day we are discovering new things. Yes, let us be too ambitious, let us be too dreamy, because remember, we're not the leaders of tomorrow, we are the leaders of today. And thank you.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Sarah. This is very inspiring to hear, and yet the world unfortunately still need to understand how they can fully use the potential of young people as you and as Rafu as well, and how to fully unleash their potential to create change. But young people themselves are doing it everywhere, and they are leading change everywhere. Rafu, linking the discussion back to what we said at the beginning, that this side event will focus on the aim of the commission, of this session of the commission, which is focusing on resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Rafu, from your experience, how did ageism affect young people during the COVID-19 pandemic? Can you share with us anything that you've witnessed as a young people throughout the past devastating 3 years of the challenges that young people faced during this pandemic?
Okay, thank you so much, Batol. Let me start by just re-emphasizing again, especially within the context of Nigeria, that if we are to rate, the category of those who are affected, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, from our own side, we feel that, young people were the most affected. And, when you look at it economically, when you look at it health-wise, socially, security-wise, you see that they were at the forefront of the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me start by, taking it from the aspect of some of the mitigating interventions that government set in place to addressing, COVID-19 pandemic. Many of those interventions were not youth sensitive. You see that majority of interventions focus largely on children, focus largely on the age, with the assumption that those ones were the most vulnerable. And so young people were largely neglected in terms of the economic support that government gave to addressing some of the challenges that came with the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, the resultant effect was also the NSAS protest that we saw in Nigeria. And that was largely because young people were excluded from the interventions that were designed to addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. If you look at it from the health perspective, you see that majority of the recovery effort, or if you like, the preventive and vaccination interventions, were also focused largely on people who we cannot categorize as old people, because the assumption was that young people were relatively stronger, young people were relatively immune, and that the focus should be on people who were above 50 years and the like. So those were the focus of the interventions that came, especially from a health perspective. For a young person, if you want to access any health facility during that period, you see that priority was given to the elderly, priority was given to those to children, and young people were largely neglected. So if you also look at it from the social side, some of the livelihood support that we saw were also not youth sensitive enough. And that's why during that period, we see a lot of young people engaging in violence, a lot of young people engaging in criminality and the likes. And for me, I think that one of the things that we need to do is to start some kind of awareness raising, start some kind of campaign, just like the lead speaker mentioned, policy interventions that ensures that all categories of people are factored when we are designing solutions to addressing some of the challenges that faces humanity in the face, without neglecting young people and without neglecting people who are of the other category as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rafu, and it's completely true what you've mentioned, and that was a trend in several government policies around the world, that it was believed that young people were protected from COVID-19, and therefore the policies were not sensitive to them. And this is just a small example of how young people face challenges in accessing health services, and how health services are not sensitive towards young people's needs. This is as well, we've seen how young people were pushed to be on the front line fighting COVID-19 pandemic without even being treated as equal partners. So these experiences that Rafu and Sarah shared with us are enlightening, but sadly, they are just a fairly representative of what millions of young people face around the world. And so far, we have established together that ageism is not solely a youth issue, nor it's an older person issue. It affects all generations. And we have learned about its nature and determinants. So now we come to what I call the exciting part of our side event, which is an intergenerational dialogue, so we can discuss together what we can do as solutions to address ageism from both experienced people and also youth leaders from different aspects and backgrounds. So I'll give the floor to the speakers to introduce themselves in this intergenerational panel, and I'll give the floor to Adrian. Adrian, if you can tell us a little bit about your background and how you saw and faced ageism as part of your journey.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I do thank you for having me be part of this. I do think that this is part of the solution. And now here's a little bit of, let's say, my life in ageism. First of all, I'm a host of a podcast called Generation Bold, the Fountain of Truth. And most of our listeners are in the United States, Australia, and the UK. And we are pre-retirees, retirees, and people in the field of aging, professionals. And I make a joke, and everybody gets it. And the problem is that they get it. And the joke is, when we're old, we're incompetent, we're incontinent, and we're invisible. And one day, nobody will get that joke. That's my hope. I will also say that I am a journalist, and I worked with Robert Butler, who started the Age Boom Academy for journalists and wrote one of the first really powerful books. He won the Pulitzer on ageism, Why Survive? Growing Old in America. And the fact is, things have not changed all that much since that book was published decades ago. In 1980s, I started with a bunch of other lawyers, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. And this is 1980s. And we discovered that elder abuse was rampant. But it wasn't until, and I was privileged to be invited by President Obama to the 2015, and this is 1988, now 2015, Washington Workshop on Aging, where for the first time elder abuse was recognized as a federal issue and became a federal crime under the Attorney General's office. But that's a long time between drinks to take a look at that particular issue. And I will tell you that before COVID, as a journalist, it was very difficult to get an article published that had anything to do with aging. It was just not a hot topic. And even with COVID, the topic is always about our vulnerability. I used to say I was an old lady, but now I'm a vulnerable population, because that is the way we are looked at. And COVID has only reinforced that. On the other hand, it has shined a light on aging and ageism. I will also say that that on an international level, I'm very privileged to work with the United Nations NGO on Aging. And one of the things we recently started was a newsletter. And this newsletter, next issue, is going to be about the difference between a right and an obligation, and why we so much need a convention for the rights of older persons. It must be a right, or we will not have that same view of our equality, instead of entitlements and the fact that the government has an obligation for us. We would like to see that we have a right. And I'm going to finish here. For the past 2 years, and this may surprise everybody, for the past 2 years, I've been the executive director of an institute, a new institute called the Catalyst Institute. I just finished my stint, and it's geroscience. Geroscience is changing aging biologically. We actually can reverse some of the declines of aging and prevent some of the declines. And yet, even in the scientific arena, we discovered that there's ageism in artificial intelligence and also in clinical trials. So it really is systemic. I will finish by saying that I was a lawyer. Don't hold that against me. But I was a lawyer at age 22. And I am very sympathetic to what I heard from these young people, because I was discriminated against, there's no doubt, because I was a woman in those days and also because I was younger. And I actually think it took longer to get respect because of my age than because of my gender. I was about 8 or 9 years before I really had the position I should have had, only because of age. So my choice was to be actively resented when I was younger and to be passively ignored when I was older. And that's what ageism has to change, our own personal experiences. And I think it will, because of programs like this. So thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And now we'll go to Gabrielle Alves. If you can introduce yourself as well, Gabrielle.
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Gabrielle Alves. I am an anti-racist researcher at Plataforma Cipó, which is a Brazilian-based think tank. Currently, I'm working with projects focused on environmental and climate justice, especially through a partnership with a youth-led organization named Lab Jaca, based in a Rio de Janeiro favela. I'm also working with advocacy towards the ratification of the Escazú Agreement, and I hold a bachelor's degree in political science, and now I'm a law student. I could relate so much with Sarah's previous speech. I often feel very anxious and stressed to achieve everything in the next couple years of my life. And as a woman, there is even more pressure. So I could even associate like my imposter syndrome with ageism as well. So thank you so much for this discussion. It's been really eye-opening, and I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And we'll go now to Jack Kupferman.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this great panel. Also, it is kind of eye-opening. What comes to mind immediately is the similar responses that we have to ageism from youth and older. It's the same thing. We're seeing that discrimination, whether it be employment, health, interpersonal relationships, they're much the same at both ends of the age spectrum. One of the things that I've seen over the course of years is, and before I'll go further, I'm Jack Kupferman, the president of Grey Panthers NYC, which has traditionally been a inspiration for intergenerational advocacy, going back to the 1970s. Maggie Kuhn, the founder, was one of the most important activists of the 20th century. And what she focused on is looking at partnerships, younger and older people working together towards a common goal. And what this side event is focusing on that, looking at the power of younger people, the power of older people, and how do we make that synergy? Where do we go to in terms of equal partnerships? Older people, as has been said often, experience the discriminations both internally and externally in terms of ageism, and younger people feel the same way. Let me give you an example of one of the things that we have been doing to combat this type of ageism. And we have an intergenerational, well, obviously we do have an internship program where we get some of the best students from around the country and the world to work with Grey Panthers on significant projects. We go out of our way to ensure that we encourage their voices, we listen to the power of their suggestions, because older people do not have all the answers. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that those answers come out, whether they be creative or technical or whatever it may be. And inevitably, the contributions of younger people are the equivalent of the contributions of older people. So we see this, and this is the type of thing that we need to do nationally and globally, to look at those intergenerational partnerships to accomplish whatever the goal is that we would like to see. So I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thank you, Jack. And we'll go deeper into these kind of solutions in the next discussion as well. And last but not least, I'll give the floor to Numan Anwar, if you can introduce yourself as well.
Good evening, everyone. It's evening in my part of the world. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm speaking from New Delhi in India, and I would like to talk about the ways in which young people, specifically in my country, experience various issues that stem from political and sort of legal hurdles that exist in terms of participation and creation of opportunities. I'd just like to say that I think that in my country, ageism exists to a systemic extent more towards young people than towards old people. Towards old people, it exists in the form of, say, hurdles in terms of infrastructure and not enough thinking about creating access to spaces. But in terms of social attitudes, it's something that's less pervasive. To just introduce myself in short, I'm a policy researcher and political aide with India's oldest political party. But the most visceral realization of the fact that ageism exists against youth in my country, something that I identified a couple of years ago when I was still in university, and India was gripped by protests against a citizenship law that was trying to create a religious basis for citizenship in the country. It was a protest movement led largely by young people. And the attitude of people in power, in positions of authority, say, for example, the National Security Advisor, members of the judiciary, esteemed members of civil society, towards young people who were leading these movements, talking about things in terms of how young people are open to influence from all the wrong kind of forces and tend to think about ideas that are not in the best interests of the country, are things that made it very obvious to me as an individual that this is something that affected our country on a political and social level in terms of the way people thought, and also in the way in which governments and authorities commented or enacted policies in our country. And I'd like to touch upon that a little more when I get the chance to, but it is lovely to be part of this conversation. And, yeah.
Thank you so much, Noman, and we'll get to you actually shortly. And hearing all these different backgrounds make me feel, and I hope everyone here in safe hands to discuss the solutions that we can do to create a world without ageism, along the different 3 types of solutions that were discussed and introduced by Dr. Vanya. So let's start by tackling the first type of solutions, which is policy and law. And going back to you, Noman, actually, so you've just said that you are a policy researcher and a political eyed, and with a background in human rights, social development, and civil rights. So you must have a unique experience when it comes, and a unique insight when it comes to how ageism can manifest in governmental action and legislation. Can you tell us a little bit how to prevent social attitudes and stigmas from influencing policy making?
Yes, definitely. So I think the best way to contextualize this would be to start with a statistic. India has the largest young population in the world. The median age of my country is 28.5 years old. That means that there are 600 million odd people who are less than 28 years old in this country. And people are always talking about it in terms of a demographic advantage, except the fact that the cut-off or the criteria for becoming a legislator in this country is 25 years of age. So there are no people below the age of 25 or between 18 and 25 who can define policies relating to education or employment opportunities or the business environment or NGOs and various kinds of opportunities that young people would find themselves in. In fact, there are less than 5% of our parliament is less than 30 years old. And that reflects in the kind of policies that are put out in such a young country. The average age of our parliamentarians is 62 in a country where 600 million people are younger than 28. And it reflects in the fact that there are riots in this country about regarding employment and the lack of employment and the lack of meaningful opportunities to work. In terms of how this can be changed, I think that on the level of policy, it's essential to bring an amendment to the sections of our constitution or what we call the Representation of the People Act, which defines the criteria for being able to stand for or win and occupy political office. I think it's important for young people to find representation in the highest circles of political operation, to find themselves in the midst of conversations where they can define policies on things like employment or education. And it's necessary for people in power to take note of this and recognize the disadvantage or the problems we're creating for ourselves by not involving young people in this process. So that is something that I would suggest on my side.
Thank you, Noman, for this suggestion. And actually, within the same topic of policy and law, we'll move to Adrian now. And in some of your writings, Adrian, you shared thoughts about issues with policies addressing ageism for older people, such as the Older Americans Act and the Senior Consumer Protection Policy. Can you share lessons learned on that front?
Yes, I think the greatest lesson is that words do matter. I'm going to bring you back to 1965. The Older Americans Act was an act of goodwill to make sure that communities were friendly, let us say, to the needs of older adults. But it could have been called the Community Enhancement Act, not the Older Americans Act, because immediately those words become divisive. Now today, foster grandparents information is in there. Families with young children are covered there. Workplace equality is covered there. All kinds of things that you could never imagine if all you heard was the Older Americans Act. Same thing, consumer protection, why not call it consumer rights? Because the minute that you say that there's a group that's needing protection, you're already making them the other. Now, I'll give you some really difficult issues here because people of goodwill could be very blind when it comes to this. We had a recent act called the Secure Act that recognizes that we are living longer, working longer, and we're healthier, and allows us to leave our money into retirement programs longer, which is a wonderful thing because we are living longer, we are a healthier nation. At the same time, the minute that happened, the SEC said, well, you know what, if you're an advisor and your client is over the age of 65, you can withhold their money for up to 45 days if you think there's a problem with their competency. And that is without any adjudication at all. So sometimes protectivism in the law makes very bad policy. At the same time, there are areas in policy where we don't have any at all. The UK, for example, has a longevity policy for national health. We don't have that in the United States. And we often say our NGO on aging would like a convention on the rights of older adults. And in the US, we often say, well, we don't need that. Well, the fact is that longevity, health span, meaning healthy longevity, equity, we don't have any types of laws here. These should be rights for the people, not obligations of the government. And that's the way it's been looked at. It's an obligation. And it is causing a lot of divisiveness without the point of view that everything that benefits the older adult benefits the families, benefits the younger people, and vice versa. So if we become less stuck on words like older and more interested in the policy and the way they're implemented, I think we're going to be much better off. And that's why I've seen some issues with regard to the words, even from people of goodwill who are trying to do the right thing.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And you've helped us shed light how sometimes the incompetent language can create more discrimination towards older people or younger people in those policies. Now we move to Gabrielle, and still in the solution section of policy and law. And we spoke, Gabrielle, earlier about the COVID-19 pandemic and access to health services. But when it comes to policy and law, when it comes to health as well, and based on your experience, what can we learn from the intersection of ageism and health policies in Brazil?
Thank you. As we've been highlighting, ageism affects all ages. So I will start by saying that here in Brazil, there is a sharp increase in AIDS among older women and some other countries in Latin America. And some aspects can be taken in consideration when talking about this. For example, the wrong assumption that older people are not sexually active, and the focus on younger groups when structuring advertising policies to warn about the risks of sexually transmitted diseases. So a concrete side effect of ageist approaches is a late diagnosis of AIDS among the elderly. And other examples can be listed in this intersection. For example, stigmatized groups, whether because of race, gender, social class, or age, they perform worse when faced with negative stereotypes. So as Dr. De La Fuente said, expectations of others may play an important role in older adults' performance on cognitive tasks and motor skills. And the same thing can happen with the youth. These internalized stereotypes can be a cause of anxiety and self-sabotage, as I said before. And politically, in Brazil, we still face a movement called School Without Party. And it's a movement that advocates that sexual education threatens the safety of children and teens. And studies have shown that there is a huge importance with this sexual education in order to have a healthier youth with healthier habits. And the problem with ageist movements like this is that they think that a determined age group is not able to dialogue or learn to develop critical thinking. Another thing that can leave this mark, as you said, is like the type of violence against children, if I'm able to connect with another question. And that it's hyper-connected with ageism because children are rights holders. And even though they are not often treated like that, because people think that culturally it's okay to violate their rights because they are small, it's not okay. The SLAP law in Brazil, also known as Boy Bernardo law, is an important step on this aspect because it ensures that both the child and the adolescent do not suffer any form of punishment that is degrading and implies correction by physical punishment or humiliation, resulting in physical suffering or injury. So this law encourages parents and the whole society in general to learn to dialogue with them and look for other nonviolent paths. And this is a great example of anti-ageist policy because you have less children with harms in the hospitals. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. And it's very interesting to hear about the SLAP law in Brazil as an example of anti-ageist policy. So now we've discussed the first type of solution, which is policy and law, and we're going to go to the second one, which is educational activities. And I'll go back to Adrian. Adrian, if you can talk to us a little bit about biological aging, which is a topic not taught and neglected everywhere. Can you tell us from your experience a little bit about this and how it relates to contributing to educational activities to combat ageism?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of good news. And the good news is that there's been a lot of geroscience breakthroughs. And these breakthroughs deal specifically with some of the things that make us vulnerable all as a population, and certainly as we age. Our immune system, mitochondria, which has to do with the strength of our cells, and I can go on and on scientifically. But the point is that there are new protocols, devices, medications, self-care. We know more about how we should be eating and so on, to live longer, healthier, right? And we even now have a contest. I mean, we've gamified longevity. We can tell you which nations live the longest and the healthiest and so on. So we're looking at health span, not just longevity, but healthy aging. Now, where is the problem? The problem here is that because these are solutions for the conditions of aging, younger adults, even young doctors in medicine, see this as geriatrics. It's called geroscience, not called medical science. And so they do not get to understand the human body as we age. We personally have all kinds of confusion about what we should be doing about nutraceuticals. The fact is that we age differently as each other, but we also even age differently in our bodies. Different parts of I always say I'm 73, but some parts of me are still good. The point is that we do not really understand what aging means biologically, so we're focused on the chronologic. We should be learning more about that. It should be part of healthcare for kids. Kids do get healthcare. It should be certainly an absolute staple for medical professionals of all types and people in the field of aging, social workers, people who are in the business of aging, creating assisted living communities and senior residences do not know how we age. And I will conclude with this real problem. Because of the way in the US, we deal with breakthroughs in science. Aging has been suggested should be called a disease. Aging should be called a disease in and of itself. In order to get through some of these breakthroughs, because we look only for breakthroughs that are curative, not preventative. So what we really need to do is we're talking about ageism. We also ought to understand how we age. And for the younger people listening, you start really aging at age 30, not at age 65. So we ought to know this, and we ought to be starting almost from the womb to understand how to age better. Because if we are healthier, if we can make more contributions because we are healthier and less of an economic drain as we age, that will also help with ageism. Because some parts of prejudice are true. We do cost money in healthcare as we age. We do have less abilities for healthy contribution. If we turn that around, it's pretty good. So that's what I'm hoping is going to happen.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And I completely relate to what you've been mentioning and how even the health education of the health workforce does not focus on biological aging and focuses rather on breakthroughs in diseases rather than embracing aging as a process and making sure that everyone understands that regardless of the different age groups. Now we'll move to Nouman, and it's the same category of solutions, which is the educational activities. And from your experience, Nouman, again, if you can tell us, how does ageist philosophy and bias influence the tendency of vulnerable state actors to clamp down on civil society and public protest?
Yeah, so I think I'd like to start by saying that across the world, in many parts of the world where governments are less democratic than would be ideal, let's say in Africa or West Asia, what the West calls the Middle East, or in South Asia, where I'm from, there has been a tendency of civil society to be led by youth, and youth is at the forefront of civil society. Movements against vulnerable state actors sort of lashing out to try to secure their position or stabilize themselves. And that lashing out often comes in the form of something I mentioned earlier, which is an attempt to discredit or disenfranchise younger people by arguing that they do not have the legitimate right or experience to make comments about a political situation or to criticize a policy. And I think that in terms of education, how this can be reversed is through, I mean, a set of different things. I think, say, moral science education or various kinds of depictions of political leadership or just authority in general across the world. Always, that kind of depiction is always of, say, an old man, like often someone wearing a suit and tie who looks very experienced and knowledgeable. And it in itself disenfranchises young people who have strong views and a very deep stake in many political developments that take place across the world in every country, and would like to be involved, would like to make decisions, would like to participate in the process of resolving conflicts or creating new ideas and new policies to take countries forward and to contribute to their growth. And I think that in terms of education, it's important to look at those curricula in individual countries and on, say, regional levels, and think about what aspirations are created, what ideas are created in the heads of children or college and university going students in terms of how legitimate it is for them to be involved in political decision making, and how legitimate it is for them to be part of these conversations. And if those depictions change, people feel empowered, people are enfranchised, and they participate in conversations as equal stakeholders, as people who feel like they have a seat at the table. And that's something that in my experience in India, and also having worked for some time on the Middle East, is something that is severely lacking at the moment. It requires urgent redressal. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Noman, for explaining this, and also suggesting that we need to revisit our political curricula and what the younger generation is receiving in terms of education when it comes to political participation. And still in the same solution category, which is educational activities. And now we're going to hear from Jack. And you mentioned earlier that you work towards building trust and understanding between younger and older generations through your organization. Can you tell us what kind of educational activities and initiatives you have created, managed, or experienced that had the most potential in addressing the misconception about ageism?
Well, I'd like to, yes, thank you very much. There's a number of suggestions that I have in terms of education and ageism. One of the things that would be very useful for around the world is for everyone in their formal education, that there's always some reference to age. That means things like including the issues of aging in the curricula of even kindergartners or people in first grade. Also to include, what is it about the social safety net? Why is it important for a 6-year-old to understand the rudiments of what's going to happen when you're 65? That will reduce the issues of ageism, because as was referenced before, there seems to be two components to combating ageism for both younger people and older people. One is education of various stripes, and the other is familiarity. Hanging out with older people, hanging out with younger people, so that each has a sense of the power and their abilities. We have become, over the course of decades, more separated by generations, and we forget that people of other generations have at least the same abilities as our own. What we need to do to develop that intergenerational solidarity is to work together towards some common goal. So the inclusion of issues of age and creativity in curricula. That's one thing. In terms of education, we also need to include issues of policy, educating policymakers. And policymakers does not only mean legislators. Policymakers means people in the village, in the community, and importantly, in corporate life. Because there's so much that could be incorporated into a corporate policy that will positively affect younger people and older people, and at the same time, at least make an awareness on ageism. I had also referenced the intergenerational connections that we've made at Grey Panthers, where we bring in the interns and others with the presumption that their power and their abilities are the equivalent, if not greater than the people who have been doing it for decades. So I'm just referencing those things as examples of what might be available in terms of education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack, for all of these suggestions to how we can improve educational initiatives to focus on awareness on ageism. And now we're going to go to the last intergenerational interventions, the last type of solutions, and we'll start with Gabrielle. And Gabrielle, how can we build intergenerational shared sites to promote immersive experiences in local communities?
Thank you. Well, working with environmental and climate justice, I've seen like the importance of intergenerational dialogues. And when you have a proper site to promote this type of interaction, it's way better and way organized. I had the opportunity to visit a Quilombola traditional Black community in Alagoas here in Brazil, and they had a small house built by the local Black women dedicated to coordinating events, political actions, and even to sell their traditional crafts. What impressed me the most was the role of Black women of all ages in developing every decision inside the building named Association of Quilombola Artisan Women. And I think the oral traditions were also very strong because the oldest woman there was always recalling the important moments of their people, and the youth was hyper-connected and able to spread their word and views further and also attract more policies and investments to their local community. And when I spoke to Marlene, one of the leaders there, she told me that her job was to encourage the youth to study in the city, but most importantly, to come back and share what they've learned and make their community better, to build better youth and also to teach the elderly. And with this other project that I'm working with based in Rio de Janeiro, during the first phase of the project, we had the opportunity to collect stories of local leaderships engaged in promoting environmental and climate justice. And they always highlighted the importance of a diverse decision-making process, gathering activists of all ages and backgrounds, which is something that the Escazú agreement, an agreement that promotes public participation in the Latin American and the Caribbean promotes. And I think it encourages a better policy-making process.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle, for sharing those examples of immersive experiences from local communities. And going back to Jack and again on intergenerational interventions. And Jack, your organization, Grey Panthers, is the embodiment of an intergenerational interventions as it envisions a world in which both old and the youth have much to contribute to make our society more just and human. Can you just share a few examples of intergenerational interventions you have done that had the most impact in your opinion?
Well, you know, as in the chat, there's a couple of things in the chat. Amal had said something about that I had completely forgotten about, is that in our UN interventions, for as often as possible, we have our younger people speak on behalf of the constituency of older people. What that does is that everybody's head pops up, meaning that when a younger person is speaking on behalf of the rights of older people, the audience will say, wow, why is that happening? And they will listen more closely. So that's one example of that intergenerational collaboration that provides more power. Another example is that generally, in most of these activists entities, as reflected by Gabrielle, there's that coordination between younger and older activists, and they are working together. They don't even realize that this is that intergenerational solidarity that we're talking about. And if we can bring that to the fore, meaning bring that up for everybody around the world to encourage that kind of communication and that kind of partnership to achieve something, we will be combating ageism. And this is part of what Grey Panthers is about. You'll also note that, also reflective to what Gabrielle was saying, that older people are often kind of not so much the backbone, but the essential component of activist campaigns, because they have the time, they have the experience, and they have the desire to share that with younger people and to make sure that the goal is accomplished. So let's try globally to bring these powerhouses together, younger people and older people, to accomplish some important goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack, and thank you everyone who was with us in the panel today for all of these suggestions on how we can combat ageism and end it as a problem affecting the different age groups. Unfortunately, because we're running off time, we will not be able to have more interventions on this session, but we can continue these discussions later after the side event, of course. And just to summarize the key messages we have heard so far since the beginning of our side event and through the intergenerational panel we've had, that ageism is not a problem that affects older people. It also affects all the different age groups, including young people. And also that ageism is everywhere, it affects everyone, and it's harmful. And from the different and great experiences and suggestions for solutions that we've heard, we need a policy change, we need to address the language in policy, and we need to make sure that the policies are sensitive towards the different age groups and does not discriminate against them. And when it comes to the educational activities, we need to ensure familiarity and focus on biological aging and ensure that the health workforce understands that, and ensure that the different age groups understand ageism and its determinants. And finally, when it comes to the intergenerational dialogue and the intergenerational initiatives, we need to focus on communication, and we need to have those immersive experiences and examples shared to promote the better communication between the young and the old. So now I'll give the floor to Masumi Oni, who is the chief of the branch for the social inclusion and participation branch within the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, one of the organizers of this event, along with MGCY, ILO, and WHO, for last remarks.
Thank you so much, Batu, for taking us through this conversation. It was very insightful and constructive, but the fact remains is that this is only the beginning of the conversation on youth, ageism, and intergenerational solidarity. At DESA, we are very much aware that we have a lot of work to do to bring ageism to the core of public debate and to encourage member states as well as stakeholders to review and adjust if needed their laws, policies, and various interventions through the lens of ageism. As you can see in this side event, our approach is very much anchored in the intergenerational solidarity, because we know that we need to work together across all age groups to address this type of complex and societal issue. Our partnership with MGCY, WHO, and ILO, as well as all of you present in this side event, is what will allow us to advance in our efforts to address ageism. So thank you very much to all the co-organizers, Khalid, Vanya, Dorothea, our wonderful speakers, excellent moderator, and all the participants for taking the time to contribute to this discussion. I'd like to send a special shout out to Milani, our intern, who is also a social worker. She took on the challenge of developing and organizing this event just a few weeks into her internship with the UN. Also, an enormous thanks to Isabel, Amal, and Amin at DESA for working tirelessly behind the scenes to shape this event. So let's continue to work together towards a world for all ages. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Masumi Ono. And thank you everyone who joined us today. I hope we inspired some thoughts and some ambition to drive change when it comes to ageism. And I wish you all a good day. Thank you.